Have you ever stopped to think about how federal financial aid actually lands in your account?
Hmm.
Or maybe how your local school gets funding for certain programs?
Yeah, it's something many people probably take for granted.
Well, today we're diving deep into something that could change all that. There's been a huge Supreme Court ruling related to dismantling the U.S. Department of Education.
A really critical development.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to explore what this actually means, for schools and students right across the country. In this deep dive, it's really built just for you. We've gathered insights from, well, a whole stack of sources.
Mm.
We've got a powerful Supreme Court dissent, analysis from think tanks like Brookings and the Century Foundation, plus news coverage from CBS, AP, Government Executive, and SCOTUS blog, too.
So our mission here is basically to pull out the key pieces, the most important bits of information from all that material. The idea is to give you a really solid understanding of what the Department of Education actually does, what these executive actions and court challenges are all about, and, the potential fallout for everyone.
Sort of a shortcut to getting up to speed on a pretty complicated issue.
Exactly. It's moving fast, and it's definitely consequential.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The Department of Education, a lot of people might not even know it's a full cabinet-level agency.
Right, established back in 1979 by Congress.
And before all these recent changes, it was actually the smallest cabinet department. Only about, what, 4,200 employees?
Yeah, tiny in terms of staff.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and this came up in our sources. Its budget. Third largest among all cabinet departments. Around $268 billion a year.
That's a staggering number. It really is. And what's fascinating is, education itself is mainly run by states and local districts.
Mhm.
But the federal government has had this supporting role for a long, long time, since the 1860s even, mostly data and grants back then.
So the department doesn't, set up schools or decide what kids learn.
No, exactly. It doesn't set standards, graduation rules, curricula, and none of that. Its main job is really about the money, financial support, and making sure federal laws are followed.
Kind of a financial and oversight partner.
Precisely.
And the scale of that support, it's just immense when you look at the numbers our sources provide. Think about federal student aid.
Yeah.
The department handles the whole system. Over $120 billion annually to more than 13 million students.
And that includes Pell Grants, right, which are a huge part of their budget.
60% of the budget, yeah. And then there's the massive $1.6 trillion federal student loan portfolio. That affects over 40 million Americans.
Wow. And that's just higher education. If you look beyond that, the department is also funneling critical money into K-12 schools.
Like Title I?
Exactly. Title I. That's an $18.4 billion program. Reaches almost 2/3 of all public schools, specifically helping schools with lots of low-income students. And this is really important. It manages the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA.
Right, for special education.
Funds and support services for over 7 million students with disabilities. So you start thinking, what happens if you disrupt these massive programs? What's the impact on millions of people?
It's a huge question. And, another piece our sources highlight is the Office for Civil Rights, the OCR.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
This office enforces those key anti-discrimination laws, Title VI, Title IX, the ADA, to make sure everyone has equal access to education.
So they handle complaints.
Everything from individual cases, like a kid being denied special ed services, to bigger systemic issues like harassment based on gender identity or sexual orientation in schools.
Okay, so that sets the stage for what the department does.
Right. So what does all this mean for its future? Because our sources really lay out how the current administration under President Trump has been very clear about wanting to close the department.
Yeah, it's been a stated goal since the campaign. He even called it a big con job at one point.
Which brings up that whole executive authority question, doesn't it?
It does. Historically, presidents have generally acknowledged you need Congress to actually abolish a cabinet agency Congress created.
But the president has said he thinks he can achieve a virtual closure without Congress.
He has, yeah, that's the claim.
And then Secretary Linda McMahon, right after getting confirmed, she put out a memo saying she'd lead the department's final mission.
Final mission. Strong words.
And then, boom, March 11th, 2025, barely a week in, she announces this massive reduction in force, RIF.
Which is basically a formal term for major layoffs.
Meager's right. Nearly 50% of the workforce gone overnight, from over 4,100 down to about 2,100.
And the impact, according to the sources, was immediate and pretty severe. Whole offices just gone.
Like the Office of English Language Acquisition.
Terminated. And huge chunks of the teams handling K-12 money, IDA grants, even the Office of Civil Rights, 7 out of 12 regional offices eliminated.
And people were locked out immediately.
That's what employees reported, yeah. Locked out of systems instantly, no chance for any real handoff of work. It sounds less like streamlining and more like, well, gutting the place.
It's definitely not just trimming the fat.
No.
And initially, the reason given was efficiency, right?
That was the line. But later, Secretary McMahon actually confirmed in a congressional hearing that no analysis was done beforehand.
Wait, really? No analysis on how firing half the staff would affect the department's ability to do its job?
None admitted no, which is pretty stunning when you think about the scale of the operations we just discussed.
No kidding. So it's maybe no surprise it led to legal action almost immediately.
Well, first the president formalized it. March 20th, Executive Order 14242 tells the secretary, take all necessary steps to close the department and send authority back to the states.
And then specific plans came out.
A day later, yeah. Student loans were initially slated for the Small Business Administration.
Which seems like an odd fit.
Right. Later court documents suggested Treasury was actually in talks to take it over. Special needs and nutrition programs were heading to Health and Human Services.
And civil rights?
Slated for the Justice Department, according to other sources. Workforce training grants, possibly to labor. Basically carving it up and shipping the pieces out.
Okay, now the legal battle really heats up.
Definitely. A big group, 20 states, D.C., school districts, unions, they sued.
What was their argument?
They basically said, look, these actions aren't just managing the department, they're effectively dismantling it without permission from Congress. They argued it violates the Constitution's separation of powers. The Take Care Clause, which says the president has to make sure laws are faithfully executed.
Right.
And also the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA, which governs how agencies operate.
And the first court agreed.
The district court did, yeah. Granted a preliminary injunction on May 22nd. That's like a temporary stop order. The court was pretty explicit. So the administration's true intention seemed to be dismantling the department without a law allowing it. And the firings would stop the department from doing its legally required jobs.
So they ordered the government to stop the firings and rehire people.
Yes. Halt the RAF and reinstate employees to get the department functional again. And then the First Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the injunction. They specifically noted the government hadn't really disputed the lower court's findings about the intent and the impact of the RAF.
So 2 courts said stop.
Correct.
But the administration didn't stop there.
Nope. They took it straight to the Supreme Court asking for emergency relief.
Oh.
And on July 14th, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 vote, granted the administration's request for a stay.
So what does a stay mean in this context?
It means the Supreme Court paused the lower court's order. So the injunction is lifted for now. The layoffs affecting almost 1,400 people and the restructuring plans can go forward while the main lawsuit continues working its way through the appeals court and potentially back to the Supreme Court later for a full review.
Okay, this is crucial, though. The Supreme Court didn't actually rule on whether dismantling the department this way is legal or illegal.
Exactly. That's a critical point. They haven't decided the merits of the case itself. Granting a stay is a discretionary thing, something the court usually says it only does in extraordinary circumstances.
So what signal does that send? If 2 lower courts said stop, and the Supreme Court says go ahead for now while we wait.
That's the big question, isn't it? It certainly raises questions about the balance of power and judicial deference to executive action, even action that lower courts found likely illegal.
And there was a strong dissent.
Oh, yeah. Justice Sotomayor, joined by Kagan and Jackson, a really powerful, extensive dissent, she called the majority's decision indefensible. She argued it essentially hands the executive the power to repeal statutes by firing all those necessary to carry them out. Called it a grave threat to the separation of powers.
And she felt the government's legal arguments weren't strong enough for the court to step in like this?
Especially, she wrote, when the case was still actively being considered by the appeals court and 2 lower courts had already refused this kind of interim relief.
Okay, so the stay is granted, the layoffs proceed. What does this mean, practically speaking, for people on the ground? For you listening?
Well, critics, and there are many cited in our sources, experts, schools, unions, they argue this could cause widespread disruption, maybe even chaos.
How so? Let's take student loans first.
Okay. Experts warn that the specialized knowledge for managing that huge $1.6 trillion portfolio really resides within the Department of Ed. Shifting it to an agency like the Small Business Administration or even Treasury, which lack that specific expertise.
Could be messy.
Could cause disarray, frustration for millions of borrowers, potentially more defaults. And we saw examples of immediate problems cited in the sources.
Like that technical college.
Yeah, in Washington state. They faced an 18-and-a-half-week delay getting recertified to offer federal aid. That led to a big drop in enrollment, students losing out on tuition money they depended on.
And it's not just student loans, is it? What about the K-12 funding?
Right. The lawsuits included affidavits, sworn statements from school districts. They talked about how dependent they are, especially districts serving low-income kids, on getting that federal money on time.
To pay teachers, buy supplies.
Exactly. Even short delays force really tough choices. Potential cuts to staff, programs. States like New York, New Jersey reported real problems drawing down funds and even getting help from federal help desks because of the staffing cuts after March 11th.
So real operational breakdowns happening.
Seemingly so. And then there's the civil rights enforcement piece.
With the Office for Civil Rights hit so hard by the layoffs.
7 out of 12 regional offices gone. Advocates are really worried. They argue vulnerable students, girls, students with disabilities, LGBTQ plus students of color will face more hurdles.
Fewer avenues for help if their rights are violated.
Yeah, fewer accessible ways to get redress, especially if cases get shifted to the Justice Department, which might not have the same specialized knowledge about education issues.
So huge operational worries. But beyond that, there's this bigger philosophical debate going on too, isn't there? About block grants.
Yes, absolutely. The idea of block granting federal education funds, basically giving states a big chunk of money with fewer federal rules attached.
Proponents say this gives states more flexibility.
That's the argument. Cut the bureaucratic strings, let states and local districts decide how best to use the money potentially more productively. Some plans, like from Project 2025 mentioned in the sources, even suggest making Title I funds totally no strings attached at first, and then phasing them out entirely over 10 years.
Wow. Phase out Title I.
That's one proposal out there, yes.
Okay, but what's the potential downside to block grants? Or fewer strings?
Well, even critics often agree some federal rules can be burdensome. But the strings are usually there for a reason.
Accountability.
Fiscal accountability, making sure the money supplements, not replaces, state and local funding, ensuring funds actually reach the intended students, like those low-income kids or students with disabilities.
So the worry is, without those federal rules, the money might get diverted.
Or just result in less support overall for the students who need it most. It could potentially make inequities between rich and poor districts even worse.
It really gets to that core question of federalism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How much control should the federal government have versus states and local districts, especially when federal money is only about, 10–12% of total K-12 funding?
Exactly. It's a fundamental debate about the balance of power and the goals of federal involvement in education.
So it really feels like this whole situation, it's way more than just a legal fight or rearranging government boxes.
Oh, definitely.
It's about the basic structure of public education. Who holds the power? And ultimately, who decides how students in this country get supported?
Yeah.
Well, we have definitely taken a deep dive today into a really complex, really consequential Supreme Court decision and what it signals for the Department of Education.
From student aid and civil rights enforcement to these huge legal challenges over executive power and that fundamental debate about federal versus state control.
It's clear this isn't just about government bureaucracy. It hits home. It's about the daily lives, the future opportunities for millions of students and their families.
And that really raises a question for you, listening to this. As these changes potentially move forward, as the department's role might shrink or change, how do you see this shifting balance between federal and state power affecting education in your own community?
Yeah, what role do you think the federal government should play? Is federal oversight necessary for excellence and equal access for everyone?
It's something we're thinking about.
Absolutely. We've really only scratched the surface here. There's so much more nuance and detail. But we hope this dive gave you some maybe surprising facts, some key insights to stay informed as this whole story keeps developing.
It's definitely one to watch.